The 1%, gone bad. 7. No path to entry. MXTM aka Pirate 1 a VJ Sunu MIX. April 12, 2026. Part 7, The Locked Future. 1. No path to entry. The path was always the promise. Not the arrival was never guaranteed, was always contingent, was always subject to the specific combination of capability and circumstance and fortune that no system could reliably produce for everyone who pursued it. But the path, the existence of a route from where you were to somewhere better. The path was the promise that every prior system of stratification offered to the majority it stratified. The promise that made the stratification politically survivable, but converted the inequality of the present into the investment of the future, that gave the person at the bottom a reason to maintain their participation in the system rather than to withdraw from it or organize against it. The path was not always honest. The path was often narrower than advertised, longer than promised, more contingent on the specific accidents of birth than any meritocratic framing could honestly acknowledge. But the path was there, or was there enough, for enough people, to sustain the belief that it was there for everyone. That the child of the laborer could become the professional, that the professional's child could become the manager, that the manager's child could become whatever the next generation's economy made possible for those who accumulated sufficient of the right capabilities at the right time. The path was narrow. The path was real. The compound has closed the path. Not narrowed it. Not made it more difficult to travel. Closed it. The specific, irreversible, architectural closure of the route from outside to inside. The elimination of the mechanism through which prior stratified systems renewed their legitimacy by admitting, selectively, those from below who demonstrated sufficient capability to justify inclusion above. The removal of the mobility that was never sufficient to constitute justice but was sufficient to constitute the possibility of justice. And whose removal constitutes something for which the prior political vocabulary has no adequate name. The condition of the population that is not merely stratified but locked. Locked into its position not by the law that can be challenged, not by the force that can be resisted, not by the ideology that can be refuted, but by the architecture of a system that has closed every path that the architecture itself has not specifically opened, and has opened only the paths that serve the system's own operational requirements, and has done this so completely, and with such technical sophistication, that the closing does not look like a closing. It looks like a threshold. And the threshold looks like an invitation. And the invitation looks like the path that was always there, while being, precisely and completely, the proof that the path is gone. The path to entry has been closed through a sequence of architectural decisions that are individually defensible and collectively total. Each decision, examined alone, appears reasonable, even progressive. We select for capability. Reasonable. Who would argue that governance should not select for the capability to govern? We assess capability comprehensively. Reasonable. Partial assessment produces partial understanding. Comprehensive assessment is fairer, more accurate, more complete, less subject to the biases of the interview or the reference letter. We set the threshold where the compound's requirements demand. Reasonable. The compound has specific operational needs. The threshold reflects those needs. A lower threshold would admit those whose capability does not serve the compound's function, would dilute the inside with those who cannot contribute at the level the inside requires. We augment those we admit. Reasonable. Augmentation maximizes the contribution of those the compound has selected. It is the compound's investment in the capabilities it has assessed as valuable. We assess against the augmented baseline. Reasonable. The compound's work requires augmented capability. Assessment against the augmented baseline identifies those whose natural capability is sufficient to meet the augmented standard, those who will genuinely contribute at the level the compound's work demands. Each decision is reasonable. The sequence is the closing. Because the sequence produces a threshold calibrated to the augmented baseline, assessed against natural capability, admitting only those whose natural capability exceeds the augmented standard. Which is a threshold designed not to find the most capable outside but to find the exceptional outside. Not the capable augmented, but the capable beyond what augmentation provides. And the exceptional outside is rare, rare by definition, rare in exact proportion to the height of the threshold. And the threshold rises as the compound's augmented population improves. And the exceptional outside who might have qualified last year does not qualify this year because the baseline has moved. And cannot move the baseline with it because they are outside. And are outside because they have not qualified. And have not qualified because the baseline has moved beyond them. And the baseline will continue to move. Because the compound's augmentation is continuously improving. And the path that was already narrow has become a moving threshold that recedes as it is approached. The path that looks like it is there, the threshold that looks like an invitation, the invitation that is the architecture of the closing that will not name itself what it is. The experience of the no-path condition is not the experience of the closed door. The closed door is legible, you see the door, you see that it is closed, you understand that the closing is what stands between you and what is on the other side. The no-path condition is the experience of the path that is always almost there, always just beyond the preparation you have completed, always requiring one more qualification than you currently hold, always relocating the threshold to the position just above where your capability has just arrived. The no-path condition is experienced, from the inside, not as exclusion, as inadequacy. Not, the system has closed the path. But, I have not yet done enough to qualify for the path. The distinction that the system is specifically designed to produce, the attribution to personal insufficiency of what is in fact architectural foreclosure. The person who is outside the compound and trying to enter through the legitimate mechanisms the compound has made available. Working to build the portfolio of qualifications the assessment requires, developing the capabilities the entry system claims to measure, producing the evidence of the specific forms of value the threshold purports to reward. This person is not the victim of a closed system. They are the participant in an open one. The system is open, the compound says so, the assessments are conducted, the data is submitted, the results are returned. The results say, not yet. The results say, continue developing. The results say, the threshold is X and you are at X minus N and the path to X runs through the specific improvements that the assessment identifies. The person develops the improvements. The assessment is conducted again. The threshold has moved to X plus M. The results say, not yet. The person is not excluded. The person is developing. The person is on the path that is the architecture of the system that will not let them in, the path that runs not toward the threshold but alongside it. Keeping pace with the threshold's recession. Believing the path leads somewhere. Because the system has designed the path to be believed. Because a path that is believed is a path that is walked. And a population that is walking the path is a population that is not organizing against the system that built the path to be walked forever without arriving. The no-path condition has several distinct expressions, each a different configuration of the same architectural closing, experienced differently by the different populations the closing affects. The talented periphery. The population outside the compound that is genuinely capable, that would, by any honest assessment, contribute to the compound's functions at a level that justifies inclusion. But that is outside for reasons the entry system does not acknowledge as reasons. Born in the wrong geography, in a territory whose educational infrastructure has been depleted by the compound's capital withdrawal to the degree that the development of compound qualifying capability is practically impossible for those without the resources to access private alternatives. Born in the wrong moment, after the threshold had risen past the point where natural capability, however exceptional, can reach the augmented standard without the augmentation that is available only to those already inside. Born to the wrong parents, without the social capital, the network access, the specific form of cultural knowledge that the entry process does not officially measure but that the entry process consistently rewards, the knowledge of how to present capability in the specific forms the assessment system recognizes, the cultural fluency that is itself a form of capital distributed by prior advantage. The talented periphery does not fail the entry assessment because it is not talented. It fails because the assessment measures capability in the specific context of the capabilities the compound already has, and the specific context is the context the compound's inside created. And the talented periphery's capability has been developed in a different context, the context of the outside, the abandoned geography, the education system that has not been updated with the compound's most recent assessment criteria. And the different context produces different capability that is real and sometimes extraordinary, but that does not present itself in the forms the assessment recognizes as the capability it is measuring. The talented periphery is not failed by its talent. It is failed by the translation. The specific gap between what the capability is and what the assessment can see. The gap that the compound does not acknowledge as a gap, because acknowledging the gap would require acknowledging that the assessment does not measure capability. It measures compatibility with the compound's existing culture. And compatibility is a different thing. And measuring compatibility while calling it capability is the specific deception at the center of the entry system's claim to meritocracy. The near-qualified class. The population that is close, that has made it further along the assessment process than most, that has demonstrated capability sufficient to reach the later stages of the evaluation, but that the assessment has returned, again, with the specific result that is not rejection but deferral. Not yet. Develop further. Reapply. This population is the most politically significant, and the most politically managed, because proximity to the threshold produces the specific combination of understanding and exclusion that generates the most coherent analysis of what the system is. The near-qualified class understands the compound better than the distant periphery. It has been inside the assessment process, has seen the criteria, interacted with the evaluation systems, received the specific feedback that reveals, in its precision, the exact nature of what the system is selecting for. The near-qualified class has the analytical tools, the capability demonstrated by its near-qualification, to understand what it has seen. And what it has seen, what the assessment process reveals to those who have been close enough to see it, is the structure. The threshold that moves, the criteria that shift, the baseline that rises. The system that is not a path but a treadmill. The assessment that is not a door but the apparatus of the door's permanent and permanently deniable closing. The near-qualified class is the compound's most dangerous population. Not because it is the most capable, though it is very capable. Because it is the most informed, it has been inside the system far enough to understand the system. And it is outside, which means it has every reason to use what it understands. The compound knows this. The compound's management of the near-qualified class is one of its most carefully designed operations. The management that directs the near-qualified class's understanding of the system toward continued participation in the assessment rather than toward analysis of the assessment structure. The management that keeps the near-qualified developing, refining, reapplying. Walking the path that the compound has maintained specifically to keep them walking. Walking, and not looking up. Walking, and not asking whether the path goes anywhere. Walking, and not asking whether the path is a path or the architecture of the closing dressed as an invitation. The formerly mobile. The population that was, in prior generations, mobile, that could trace its family's history as a history of advancement, that understood its own position as the accumulation of the prior generation's movement toward the inside. And that has discovered, in this generation, that the movement has stopped. Not reversed, the compound has not taken back what prior mobility provided. But stopped. The advancement that was the prior generation's achievement has not continued into this generation. Not because this generation is less capable, it is as capable as the prior generation, by the measures the prior system used. But because the measures have changed, because the threshold has risen past the point where the prior generation's advancement trajectory projects to. Because the compound's entry criteria are no longer the criteria of the prior system that the prior generation navigated. Are the criteria of the new system, the post-scarcity, augmented, networked, cognitively stratified system for which the prior generation's social mobility calculus does not apply. And whose non-application the formerly mobile class has not yet been told explicitly. Because the system does not announce the end of mobility. It simply moves the threshold. And the formerly mobile class stands at the threshold with the qualifications that would have cleared it in the prior system. And discovers that the threshold is no longer where the prior system placed it. That the prior generation's path ended here. And the next section of the path requires the kind of capability that the prior section's endpoint does not produce. And that the kind of capability the next section requires is the kind that augmentation provides. And that augmentation is available inside. And they are outside. The no-path condition produces a specific relationship to time, a temporal experience that distinguishes it from the prior conditions of exclusion. Prior exclusion had a temporal structure. The excluded person existed in the present of their exclusion, and the future was the time in which the exclusion might be overcome, in which the political movement might succeed, in which the legal challenge might prevail, in which the generation that had been denied would produce the generation that was not. The future was the territory of the excluded's hope. The no-path condition reorganizes this temporal structure. The future is not the territory of hope. The future is the territory of the locked, the space in which the present's exclusion becomes more complete, not less. In which the threshold rises further, the augmentation gap widens, the cognitive distance between inside and outside increases. In which the biological class divide deepens, the institutional attrition continues, the managed instability of the periphery produces populations whose organizational capacity to challenge the condition declines faster than the condition's challenge requires. The future, for the no-path population, is not the time of possibility. It is the time of the locks tightening, the progressive narrowing of the opening that never was a path but that looked like one and that the population is still approaching. Not because the population has not understood that the opening is not a path, but because approaching the opening is the only thing the system makes available as an alternative to what? This is the question the no-path condition forces upon the population it produces. The alternative to approaching the threshold that recedes, the alternative to the path that closes, is not given by the system that produced the no-path condition. The system does not provide the alternative to itself. The alternative must be built from outside the system, by the population that the system has produced as its outside, toward a form of future that is not the compound's future. Not entry to the inside, but something that does not require the inside to define it. The no-path condition is the compound's most complete political achievement. More complete than the wall, which is physical and visible. More complete than the autonomous defense, which is militarily impressive but politically legible. More complete than the longevity program, which is biologically consequential but philosophically contestable. More complete than the algorithmic governance, which is technically sophisticated but structurally identifiable. Because the no-path condition is not a thing the compound has done. It is a thing the compound has arranged for the population to believe has not been done. The compound has not closed the path. The compound has moved the threshold. The threshold is always there. The assessment is always being conducted. The criteria are always being applied. The path is open. You are not yet qualified. Continue developing. Reapply. The path is open in the way that the horizon is open, always visible, always the same distance away, always the destination of the walking that does not arrive. The horizon that is not closed, that closes itself through the geometry of the earth, through the structural fact that the walking toward the horizon and the horizon's recession are the same motion. Inseparable. The walking and the recession constituting, together, the condition in which the horizon is always ahead and arrival is always approaching and the distance never closes and the path never ends and the future never arrives. And the population walks. Because the path is there. Because the threshold is there. Because the assessment is there. Because the system has built the path's existence into the population's understanding of its own position. Has made the path the population's relationship to its own hope. And has thereby made the path the compound's most efficient management of the population that the compound has most completely locked out. The population that is walking toward the threshold that will not be reached. Walking. Because the alternative, the recognition that the path is the lock, requires the specific courage of the person who stops walking, who turns around, who looks at the path from the other direction, and sees, for the first time, not where the path goes, but where the path has been keeping them from going. The specific turning that the path is designed to make difficult. by ensuring that the person who turns around is facing away from the compound and toward the outside, toward the abandoned geography, the managed instability, the subdued periphery. The world the compound has organized the path to prevent the population from facing, because the population that faces the outside instead of the threshold is the population that might build something in the outside that does not require the threshold's permission. The population that has stopped asking to be let in and started asking a different question. The question the compound built the path to prevent. Asterisk, what do we build out here? Without you. For us, asterisk. The no-path condition reveals, in its completeness, what the compound's secession doctrine actually requires. What the 1% gone bad actually needs from the population it has decided not to include. Not labor, it has automated that. Not consumption, it has closed that loop. Not political legitimacy, it has structured that away. Not military service, it has roboticized that. What the compound needs from the outside population. The specific, irreplaceable thing that the compound cannot produce inside and cannot do without, is the outside's belief in the path. The compound needs the outside to believe that the threshold is real, that the assessment measures capability, that the path leads somewhere, that the system is meritocratic, that the inside is earned and not arranged. Because the outside that believes the path is real organizes itself around the path, develops itself for the assessment, orients its ambition toward the threshold, directs its capability toward the forms the compound measures, and in all of this orientation, walks away from the outside, walks away from the abandoned geography, walks away from the between space where the alternative might be built, walks toward the compound, which is the only place the path is designed to lead. The outside's belief in the path is the compound's management of the outside's capability, the mechanism through which the compound extracts what remains useful from the outside, the aspiration, the development, the direction of capability toward the compound's assessment, while ensuring that the capability remains outside, because the threshold is designed to keep it outside, while ensuring that the outside does not build the alternative, because walking toward the threshold is walking away from the alternative. The path is the management. The belief is the compliance. The compliance is the compound's most complete and most invisible governance of the outside. The governance that requires no wall at the point of governance, that operates entirely within the governed population's own orientation to the future. The governance of hope. The specifically cruel governance that uses the population's desire for something better as the mechanism of its own management. That points the desire at the threshold. That makes the threshold the desire's object, and holds the threshold just beyond the desire's reach, permanently, while the desire does what desire does, reaches, and the reaching is the governance, and the governance is the lock, and the lock has no key, only the threshold, always there, always just ahead, always requiring one more thing, one more qualification, one more development, one more assessment cycle, before the path arrives at the door that has always been the path's true destination, the proof that the path goes nowhere, and that the population walking it has been governed by the walking all along. The path said, this way, the way said, develop further, the development said, now assess, the assessment said, not yet said, the threshold said, higher, higher said, augmentation said, inside said, entry said, assessment, the assessment said, not yet said, continue said, the path said, this way, and so it went, the circle that looked like a line, the loop that looked like a ladder, the management that looked like a meritocracy, the closing that looked like an opening, the path that was always there and that never went anywhere and that the population walked because the walking was offered as the alternative veto, the recognition that the path was built to be walked rather than arrived at, and that recognition, the recognition that stops the walking, was the only step the path was designed not to provide, the step off the path, the step toward the outside, the step that faces away from the threshold and toward the world. The threshold was designed to keep the walking population from facing the world that is not the compound's world, the world that does not have the compound's path, the world that requires the building of its own paths, toward its own places, by its own people, the world that begins the moment the walking stops, and the walker looks up, and sees, not the threshold, but the horizon, the real horizon, not the compound's managed distance, but the open one, the one that belongs to everyone who has stopped walking toward the one that does not. 32. Intelligence without mobility. Intelligence was supposed to be the key. This was the foundational promise of the meritocratic era, the promise that organized the aspirations of the majority across the entire period of the cognitive economy's expansion. That intelligence, raw, demonstrated, measurable, was the one thing that could not be contained by the accident of birth, the circumstance of origin, the specific geography of your emergence into a world that had already arranged itself before you arrived. Money could be hoarded. Land could be enclosed. Social capital could be inherited and protected and transmitted across generations through the specific networks that recognized and rewarded their own. But intelligence, the capacity to reason, to create, to understand, was not enclosed. Could not be enclosed. Emerged, stubbornly and without permission, in the children of the poor as readily as in the children of the wealthy, in the abandoned geography as readily as in the curated interior, in the bodies of those the prior system had decided had no value in quantities and qualities that the prior system could not predict and could not prevent. Intelligence was the escape route, the specific capability that the enclosed system could not fully enclose, that leaked through the walls of every stratification, that made the peasant's child the Lord's advisor, the laborious child the engineer, the refugee's child the scientist. The specific human capability that the accident of birth could constrain but could not contain. The promise was, if you have intelligence, intelligence will move you. Intelligence will be the mobility that birth denied. Intelligence will be the path that circumstance blocked. Intelligence will be the key that the enclosed system could not duplicate because intelligence cannot be manufactured by those who want to control it, it only appears, unbidden, in those the system was not expecting. The compound has kept the intelligence. It has removed the mobility. The separation of intelligence from mobility, the production of the condition in which the cognitive capability to understand one's situation is present without the capacity to alter it, is the compound's most sophisticated and most consequential governance achievement. Prior systems of stratification suppressed intelligence, burned the books, closed the universities, denied literacy, restricted access to information. Because prior systems of stratification understood the relationship between intelligence and mobility, that the intelligent person who understood their situation would eventually use that understanding to change it. Would use the cognitive capability to analyze the system, identify its vulnerabilities, organize around those vulnerabilities, and generate the specific pressure that changed the conditions producing the intelligence's constraint. The system that suppressed intelligence was the system that feared what intelligence would do if it were mobile, if the person with the capability to understand also had the capacity to act on what they understood. Suppression was the prior system's answer to the intelligence mobility connection. Suppression worked, partially, temporarily, until the intelligence leaked through anyway, until the book was copied, the university rebuilt, the literacy spread, the information circulated. Until the suppressed intelligence found the mobility that the suppression had tried to prevent. The compound does not suppress intelligence. The compound distributes it. The AI tools that allow the majority to model, to analyze, to understand their situation with a clarity and a comprehensiveness that prior generations could not approach. These tools were distributed by the compound during the transition period, distributed broadly, made accessible widely, deployed in the hands of the majority that the compound was simultaneously preparing to abandon. The distribution was not altruistic. It was economic, the extraction of value from the majority's cognitive labor during the period before automation completed the extraction. But its consequence was the equalization of analytical intelligence across the population in ways that the compound's architects understood would produce the specific dynamic they were designed to manage. A majority that could understand its situation with unprecedented clarity. But that could not translate that understanding into mobility. Because the mobility had been closed by the same architectural decisions that had left the intelligence in the majority's hands. Intelligence without mobility is not the suppression of intelligence. It is intelligence's weaponization against the person who holds it. The specific condition of the person who can see exactly where they are, exactly how they got there, exactly who made the decisions that produced their condition, and who cannot move. The compound distributed intelligence in the specific form that the compound's purposes required, and that form is the key to understanding what intelligence without mobility actually consists of. The compound distributed analytical intelligence, the capability to model, to assess, to understand the system. And withheld, not deliberately, not consciously, but through the structural logic of what the compound chose to distribute. Organizational intelligence, the capability to translate understanding into collective action, the specific cognitive capability that converts analysis into movement, that transforms the individual's understanding into the shared project that can act on what is understood. The AI tools the compound distributed are extraordinary analytical instruments. They can model the compound's architecture with precision. They can trace the decisions that produced the current condition with accuracy. They can identify the dependencies that the compound retains, the vulnerabilities it has not fully closed, the specific points at which the outside's pressure might connect to something that matters. What the compound's distributed AI tools are structurally less suited to, what they were not designed to develop, and what their deployment architecture specifically inhibits, is the organizational capability that the analysis requires to become something more than analysis. The AI tool is personal, it interfaces with the individual user, responds to the individual's queries, develops the individual's analysis. It is not, in its dominant deployment form, an organizational tool, a tool for building the shared understanding among multiple people that constitutes the foundation of collective action. It produces individually capable but collectively fragmented analytical subjects. People who understand the situation in solitary precision. Who have the analysis but not the assembly. Who can see what needs to be done but cannot find each other. Who are intelligent without being organized. Who are organized, each in their individual relationship with the platform that provides their analytical capability, but not organized with each other. Not organized in the specific way that collective action requires. The shared understanding that has been built together, that belongs to the group rather than to each member individually, that creates the specific solidarity of people who have thought through the problem in each other's presence and arrived at a shared position that none of them would have reached alone. The compound's AI tools produce individual analysis. Collective action requires collective intelligence, the intelligence that is built between people, not within them. And the compound's distributed tools are not designed for between. The intelligence without mobility condition has a specific geography, the geography of the people who understand most completely and can act least effectively. The population that the compound's analytical tools have made most informed and that the compound's architectural decisions have made most immobile. This population is not the most abandoned. The most abandoned do not have the tools or the time or the surplus cognitive capacity that the analytical understanding requires. This population is the adjacent, the near-qualified class, the formally mobile, the educated periphery whose education has equipped them with the analytical tools and whose position has equipped them with the motivation to use those tools on the analysis of their own situation. This is the population that understands the compound better than any other population outside it. Understands the compound's architecture, its dependencies, its governance structure, its entry system's actual function. Understands that the path is the lock. Understands that the intelligence they have been distributed is not the mobility it was promised to be. Understands all of this. And is stuck. Not stuck in the way the abandoned majority is stuck, the immobility of those who do not have the analytical capability to model their situation solution. Stuck in the way that the most informed prisoner is stuck, the prisoner who understands the prison better than the warden, who has mapped every corridor, timed every guard rotation, identified every structural weakness. And who cannot leave. Not because the understanding is insufficient. But because the gap between understanding and the capability to act on understanding is precisely the gap that intelligence without mobility is defined by. Intelligence without mobility produces a specific political psychology, a set of cognitive and emotional adaptations that the population caught in this condition develops in response to the experience of understanding without the capacity to act. Analytical paralysis. The condition in which the analysis of what would need to change to improve the situation becomes a substitute for the action that would produce the change. In which the model of the path to a different condition becomes the activity that fills the space where movement toward the condition would otherwise be. The intelligence without mobility population models extensively. It produces detailed analyses of the compound's vulnerabilities, the points of leverage, the organizational forms that might be adequate to the challenge. And it models again, and refines the model, and shares the model with others who model, and the models circulate, well constructed, analytically sophisticated, often deeply insightful. And do not produce the action they model. Because the action requires the organizational capability that the modeling has not built. The specific solidarity of people who have moved from understanding to commitment. Who have decided that the analysis is sufficient and the time is now and the action is what the analysis was always for. And who make the decision together. Which requires the together that the AI tools provide the materials for without providing the assembly. Competitive fragmentation. The intelligence without mobility population is not homogeneous. It is a population of highly capable, highly analytical individuals who share a structural condition but who have developed, from their individual analytical capability, individual analyses of that condition. Analyses that are often substantially correct and that differ in their specific conclusions about what should be done. The differences are not arbitrary, they reflect the genuine complexity of the situation and the genuine diversity of the population's perspectives. But the differences are also, and this is the condition-specific political consequence, more salient than the commonalities to people whose primary practice is the analysis of distinction. The intelligence without mobility population is very good at identifying the ways its members' analyses differ. It is less practiced in the work of building the shared position from different analyses, the work of negotiation, of compromise, of the construction of the collective that is adequate to act even in the presence of disagreement. The competitive fragmentation is not produced by malice. It is produced by the specific habits of a population whose capability is analytical, whose analytical capability was developed individually, whose individual development produced different analyses, and whose practice of those analyses in the public space of the distributed platform is a practice of competition, of the demonstration of analytical superiority, rather than of the building of collective understanding. The intelligence without mobility population is fragmented by its intelligence, each member's analytical capability producing a slightly different map of the same terrain, and the slight differences being more visible, more debated, more contentious than the vast area the maps agree on. Because agreement does not require the exercise of the capability. And the capability requires exercise. An exercise looks like disagreement. And disagreement looks like the impossibility of the collective. And the impossibility of the collective is the intelligence without mobility condition's most reliable self-maintenance mechanism. Sophisticated resignation. The endpoint condition, reached by the population that has analyzed the situation thoroughly, identified the fragmentation of the collective, understood the structural reasons for the fragmentation, modeled the difficulty of overcoming it, and arrived at the sophisticated conclusion that the difficulty is sufficient to constitute an effective impossibility. That the organization required to translate the intelligence into mobility is not currently achievable. And that the intelligent response to an effectively impossible situation is to accommodate it. To build the best life available within the condition. To invest the analytical intelligence in the navigation of the locked future rather than in the attempt to unlock it. Sophisticated resignation is not despair. It is the rational conclusion of a sophisticated analysis applied to the available options. The conclusion that the compound has made the situation sufficiently difficult that the intelligent allocation of individual cognitive resources is toward accommodation rather than transformation. The compound does not need to suppress the intelligence that arrives at this conclusion. The intelligence arrives at it by itself, through the application of the analytical capability that the compound distributed to the architectural reality that the compound constructed, producing the specific conclusion that the compound requires to continue operating without challenge. That the situation is effectively unchangeable. That the intelligent response is adaptation. That the capability the population has is best directed toward individual navigation rather than collective transformation. Sophisticated resignation is the compound's most complete management achievement, the population that manages itself, that uses its own intelligence to arrive at the conclusion that the compound requires. Without being told, without being coerced, without the application of force. Through the simple exercise of the analytical capability that the compound provided, on the architectural reality that the compound constructed, toward the conclusion that the compound needed. Intelligence without mobility is not a stable equilibrium. This is the most important claim that can be made about the condition, and the claim that the compound's models are most likely to underestimate. Because the models assess stability by measuring the current state of the intelligence without mobility population's organizational capacity. And the current state is, accurately, low, the fragmentation is real, the analytical paralysis is real, the sophisticated resignation is real. The models extrapolate from the current state a trajectory of continued stability, the locked future extending forward in the direction the present is pointing. What the models do not capture, what they cannot capture because it is not yet present in the data, is the dynamic that every prior instance of intelligence without mobility has produced when the intelligence has been present long enough, in the condition long enough, in sufficient density. The dynamic that is not evolution but revolution in the specific sense, the sudden shift from the accumulation of understanding to the application of understanding. The moment at which the analytical population crosses from the analytical mode to the organizational mode. Not because something external has changed, not because the compound has weakened, not because the opportunity has appeared, but because the intelligence has accumulated past the point where sophisticated resignation is sustainable, past the point where the analysis of why action is difficult is more satisfying than the attempt at action that the analysis describes, past the point where the intelligent person's internal accounting can continue to conclude that accommodation is the rational choice. The intelligence that understands exactly what has happened, exactly who made the decisions, exactly what the decisions produced, exactly what the structural consequences are, cannot, indefinitely, sustain the sophisticated resignation that the analysis also recommends. Because the analysis produces not only the conclusion that action is difficult, it produces the conclusion that accommodation is not neutral, that accommodation is itself a choice, that the sophisticated resignation of the intelligent population is the compound's governance of that population, that being managed without knowing you are being managed is still being managed, and that the intelligence that understands this and continues to accommodate is the intelligence that is participating in its own management. The intelligence that reaches this conclusion cannot sustain the accommodation. Not because it is noble, because it is intelligent. The intelligent person who understands they are being managed cannot continue to behave as if they are not being managed without experiencing the specific cognitive dissonance of acting against their own analysis. The dissonance that is not comfortable, that pressures toward resolution, and that resolves not toward the abandonment of the analysis. The intelligence is the one thing the compound has not succeeded in removing, but toward the alignment of the behavior with the analysis. The specific movement from understanding to action, from intelligence to mobility. The movement that intelligence without mobility is specifically designed to prevent. And that intelligence, in sufficient quantity, over sufficient time, under sufficient pressure, has always eventually produced. The translation from intelligence to mobility, from the analytical condition to the organizational one, requires something that the compound's distributed tools do not provide and that the intelligence without mobility condition specifically inhibits. It requires encounter. Not the digital encounter, the platform-mediated exchange of analyses between individuals who understand each other's positions without inhabiting each other's presence. The physical encounter, the specific experience of being in the same space as another person whose intelligence you have assessed through the mediated channel and whose presence adds to the mediated assessment something the mediation could not carry. The specific weight of a person who is there, who breathes the same air, whose face communicates what their text does not, whose physical reality makes a claim on your physical reality that the platform cannot simulate. The claim that says, this is real, this person is real, this situation is real. The analysis is not a game we are playing on the platform, it is the description of the actual condition of actual people, of this person in front of me, and the analysis requires an answer that the analysis alone cannot provide. Encounter produces obligation. Obligation produces commitment. Commitment produces the collective, the thing that is more than the sum of the individual analyses that preceded it. The organizational intelligence that the compound's tools cannot produce because they are designed for the individual and the collective requires the between. The compound's management of the intelligence without mobility condition is therefore, at its most fundamental level, the management of encounter. The management of the conditions in which the intelligent outside population does or does not come into physical contact with each other in ways that produce the specific organizational solidarity that encounter creates. The compound manages this not primarily through surveillance, though surveillance is part of it, but through the design of the conditions that make encounter difficult. The economic conditions that make geographic mobility expensive, that keep the intelligent outside population dispersed across the abandoned geography in the specific locations where their individual circumstances have placed them. The social conditions that have replaced the physical gathering spaces, the union hall, the civic organization, the community institution, with the platform, the mediated space that provides the simulation of gathering without the gathering's specific consequence. The platform is not the meeting. The platform produces the illusion of the meeting, the sense of having been together without the encounter that together requires. The intelligence without mobility population meets constantly, on the platform, in the mediated space, in the digital gathering that has replaced the physical one. And the meetings produce what platform meetings produce, the exchange of analyses, the refinement of positions, the specific pleasure of the intelligent engagement with other intelligent people. And not the encounter that produces the collective. Because the encounter is the thing that is not on the platform. The thing the platform was designed to simulate. And that the simulation has replaced. And that the intelligence without mobility population has accepted the simulation of as the substitute for. Because the simulation is available. And the encounter requires leaving the screen. And leaving the screen is the specific movement the compound's management of the intelligent outside has made unnecessary. And the unnecessary thing is the thing that is not done. And the thing that is not done is encounter. And without encounter, the intelligence stays brilliant, informed, analytical, immobile. The intelligence without mobility is not the final condition. It is the penultimate one, the condition just before the condition that the compound most fears and most prepares against. The condition the compound most fears is not the uprising, it has prepared against the uprising. It is not the organized challenge, it has prepared against the organized challenge. It is the specific intelligence that has found its mobility. The analytical population that has crossed from the analytical mode to the organizational one. That has discovered the encounter that produces commitment. That has built from the distributed intelligence the compound provided the collective intelligence the compound did not provide. That has translated the individual understanding of the compound's architecture into the shared project of the compound's disruption. Not disruption in the military sense, the compound has prepared for that. Disruption in the specific sense of the intelligence that has found what the compound's models said it could not find. The form of collective action adequate to the form of power it is acting against. The organizational form that does not assault the wall but undermines the foundation. The specific leverage that the intelligence identified by analyzing the compound and that the mobility enables by providing the collective capacity to apply it. The compound's management of intelligence without mobility is its most important ongoing operation. More important than the wall, more important than the autonomous defense, more important than the perimeter systems. Because the wall can stop bodies. But the intelligence that has found its mobility does not assault the wall with bodies. It applies the leverage that the analysis identified. In the specific place the analysis identified. With the specific organizational capacity the encounter produced. Toward the specific outcome the collective decided. And the compound, which has prepared for every attack its own intelligence could model, has not prepared for the attack it could not model. Because the intelligence that designed the attack was the intelligence the compound excluded. The intelligence it distributed without the mobility. That found the mobility anyway. That found it in the encounter, in the between space, in the abandoned geography, in the specific place the compound decided was not worth close attention. And that is now, quietly, applying what it understood to what it found, toward what it decided, in the specific way that the compound's models do not have a category for. Because the category was the intelligence the compound decided was not worth including. Intelligence said, I understand, understanding said, now act, acting said, how said, together said, where said, here said, but here is the abandoned geography said, yes said, so said, there is nothing here, nothing said, there is US said, we are the intelligence without mobility said, then find the mobility said, where said, in the between said, what between said, the between the compound did not close said, why not said, because it did not see it said, because said, because the compound's models model what the compound can imagine said, and said, and the compound cannot imagine what the excluded intelligence produces when the excluded intelligence finds each other said, how said, encounter said, physical said, dangerous said, yes said, and said, and necessary said, then do it.do it said, where said, in the between said, here said, there is nothing here, nothing said, there is US said, is that enough said, it has always been enough, always said, prove it said, we are proving it said, how said, by being here said, together said, yes said, and the intelligence said, is moving said, where said, toward said, what said, the thing that the path was built to prevent us from building said, what is it said, we don't know yet said, then how will you build it said, together said, the intelligence has found its mobility said, finally said, yes said, the compound's models did not predict this said, no said, why not said, because the compound's models were built by augmented intelligence that has never been. Intelligence without mobility. That has never had to find the encounter in the between, that has never needed to build the collective from nothing, that does not know what people build when building is the only option, that does not know because it has never had to said, and we have said, yes said, and so said, and so build said, what said, the future the compound locked said, it thought said, yes said, and said, and thinking is not the Sammy's doing said, no said. And way doing said, yes said, together said, in the between said, here said, where the compound did not look said, because said, because it decided there was nothing here worth looking at said, and said, and here we are said, yes said, building said, yes said, the intelligence has found its mobility said, finally said, yes. 33. The permanent perimeter. Every perimeter was supposed to be temporary. This was the implicit promise embedded in every wall that every civilization has ever built. Not stated, not codified, not written into any founding document. But present, nonetheless, as the background assumption that made the wall politically survivable for those on the wrong side of it. The wall is temporary. The condition is not permanent. The perimeter is a response to a situation, and situations change, and when the situation changes, the perimeter will change with it. The wall of the besieged city, temporary, the siege will end, one way or another, and the gates will open. The wall of the colonial frontier, temporary, the frontier will close, the territory will be absorbed, the boundary between colony and metropole will eventually dissolve. The wall of the Cold War, temporary, the ideological conflict will resolve, the wall will fall, the division will end. Every wall contained, as part of its political logic, the seed of its own eventual removal, the promise that the condition the wall expressed was not the permanent condition of the world, was not the final arrangement between those inside and those outside, was a response to a specific situation that would eventually resolve. The promise was not always kept. Walls have lasted centuries. Perimeters have hardened into facts that the people who built them thought were temporary, and that became the landscape of generations who never knew anything else. But the promise was there, the temporal promise, the promise that the wall was a response, not a destiny, a condition, not a definition. The compound's perimeter does not contain this promise. The compound's perimeter is not a response to a temporary situation. It is the permanent expression of a permanent distinction. The architectural inscription of a difference that the compound has no intention of resolving, no mechanism for resolving, no theory of why resolution would be desirable. The wall that was built not to protect until the danger passes but to define what will never pass. The distinction between those inside and those outside. Permanent, by design, by the specific decisions that made the compound self-sufficient, that automated its defense, that closed its innovation loop, that extended its governing class's biological duration beyond the span in which the people who built the wall might have changed their minds. Permanent. Not as the unintended consequence of decisions made for other reasons, but as the explicit, designed, intended outcome of the secession doctrine enacted in stone and steel and the electromagnetic perimeter of the satellite network that rings the compound at altitudes the outside cannot reach. The permanent perimeter is a new thing in the history of walls. Not because permanence is new, walls have lasted longer than the compounds they defended. Because permanence is intended, because for the first time in the history of the perimeter's builders have designed it for indefinite continuation. Have made every architectural decision with the explicit goal of ensuring that the condition the perimeter expresses cannot be altered by the population it excludes. Cannot be negotiated open, cannot be pressured open, cannot be litigated open, cannot be organized open. That the opening of the perimeter is not available as a political outcome, is not something that can be achieved through any combination of the political tools that prior excluded populations used to open prior perimeters. The permanent perimeter is not permanent because it is strong, though it is very strong. It is permanent because it has removed the mechanisms through which prior perimeters were made impermanent. Prior perimeters fell because the populations outside them found leverage, the specific pressure point that made the cost of maintaining the perimeter exceed the benefit. The compound has engineered against leverage, has removed, systematically, every form of leverage the outside population might hold. The labor leverage, automated away. The consumer leverage, closed loop away. The electoral leverage, jurisdiction away. The military leverage, roboticized away. The legitimacy leverage, indifference away. The permanent perimeter is permanent because the outside has been left with nothing that the inside requires. And a wall is only temporary when the inside needs something from the outside. When the opening of the gate is a transaction that the inside has reason to make. The gate is permanent when the inside needs nothing from the outside. When the transaction is not available. When the outside's presence at the gate is a fact the inside manages rather than a claim the inside must respond to. The permanent perimeter has a specific relationship to time that distinguishes it from the temporary perimeter's temporality. And that is, in the political sense, its most consequential characteristic. The temporary perimeter exists within historical time, within the time of events and changes, the time in which situations develop and resolve, the time in which the political conditions that produced the perimeter might produce, eventually, different conditions that the perimeter would need to respond to. The temporary perimeter is inside the story, inside the narrative of how things change. A condition that will be followed by other conditions, that has a before and an after, that is, in the deepest sense, not the final word on the arrangement between inside and outside. The permanent perimeter removes itself from historical time. Or attempts to. By constructing the conditions that would make the perimeter's removal require not a political change, not a shift in the political conditions that might be achieved through political action, but a civilizational collapse. The compound's own failure, the breakdown of the self-sufficiency that makes the perimeter independent of external conditions, as the only force that could end the perimeter from the outside. The permanent perimeter says, the only way through is if we fail. And we have designed ourselves not to fail. This is the perimeter's temporal claim. The claim to have exited the historical time in which things change because the political conditions that produce things are themselves subject to change, and to have entered a different temporality. The timelessness of the self-sufficient system. The time of the closed loop. The time in which the compound continues because the compound has designed itself to continue, and stops only when it stops itself, which it has also designed not to do. The permanent perimeter's claim to have exited historical time is the claim the compound most confidently makes and that historical analysis most consistently refutes. No system has exited historical time. Every system that has made this claim, every empire, every ideology, every civilizational project that has announced the end of the conditions that produce change, has been returned to historical time by the change it did not anticipate. Not the change it prepared against. The compound is extraordinarily prepared against the changes it can model. The change it did not anticipate. The change that arrived not through the mechanisms the compound's deterrence architecture was designed to address but through the mechanism that no deterrence architecture can be designed to address because the mechanism had not yet been invented when the architecture was designed. The permanent perimeter's vulnerability is not in its defenses. It is in its assumption that what cannot currently be imagined cannot eventually be produced. That the intelligence outside the wall, the distributed, constrained, analytically capable, ferociously creative intelligence of the excluded majority, cannot generate, from the specific conditions of its exclusion, the specific capability that the exclusion's architecture did not provide for. The assumption is the vulnerability. And the assumption is wrong. Not demonstrably wrong yet, not wrong in the specific way that the compound's analytical systems would recognize as falsified, but wrong in the way that all assumptions are wrong when they assume that the people they exclude will not eventually produce what the exclusion did not foresee. Wrong in the historical way. In the way that every permanent perimeter has eventually been wrong. In the way that walls have always discovered they were wrong. Not when the battering ram arrived at the gate they had reinforced, but when the gate became irrelevant. When the thing outside had found a way that was not the gate. The approach the wall was not built to address, because the wall was built against the threats that the wall's builders could imagine. And the outside had imagined something else. The permanent perimeter produces a specific geography on both sides of the wall. A geography that is not static but that the perimeter is designed to keep stable, and whose stability is the perimeter's most important operational product. Inside the perimeter, the geography of the managed interior, the compound's curated, optimized, continuously improved internal environment, organized around the assumption that the perimeter is permanent, that the inside's relationship to the outside will always be the relationship it currently is. Managed from a distance, surveilled without being engaged, extracted from without being included, maintained in the specific condition of insufficient organization that makes the perimeter's permanence practically sustainable. The inside's geography is planned for a world without the outside, for a world in which the compound's closure is the final condition, in which the perimeter is not a response to a temporary situation but the permanent structure within which the inside lives. The infrastructure built for self-sufficiency. The institutions designed for closure. The social architecture calibrated for the selected population's indefinite inhabitation of the defended interior. The inside plans for permanence. The inside invests for permanence. The inside develops its children for permanence, for the world inside the wall as the only world. The world in which the outside is the managed environment, the surveilled periphery, the condition to be monitored but not engaged. The world that the compound's governance has designed to continue for as long as the compound's self-sufficiency endures. Which the compound has designed to endure indefinitely. Outside the perimeter. The geography of the permanent outside, the condition of those for whom the wall's permanence is not a planning assumption but a political fact, the fact that defines the horizon of what is possible and what is not. The fact that the outside is organized around. In the specific way that every excluded population has been organized by the wall that excludes it. Partly by the wall's logic, shaped by what the wall has done to the outside's access, resources, institutions, capacities. And partly against the wall's logic, building, in the space the wall has not closed, the specific capabilities and the specific organizational forms that the wall's permanence makes necessary. The permanent outside is not the temporary outside's permanent extension. It is a different condition, a condition that has been permanent long enough to stop orienting itself toward the perimeter's eventual opening. Long enough to stop planning for entry as the goal. Long enough to have developed, in the abandoned geography and the between space, relationship to its own situation that is not defined by the compound's definition of it. Not the terrain that the compound's models describe, not the managed instability that the compound's security systems maintain, not the peripheral condition that the compound's self-understanding requires the outside to occupy. But something else. Something the outside has been producing in the space of its permanence. Something that is taking form beneath the compound's detection threshold. Something that the permanent perimeter's designers did not plan for. Because they planned for a permanent outside. Not for what the outside does with its permanence. The permanent perimeter has a philosophical dimension that the compound's governing class does not discuss directly. But that is present in every decision the governing class makes, as the background assumption that organizes all the other assumptions. The assumption that the arrangement is just. Not just in the sense of morally optimal, the governing class is sophisticated enough to recognize that absolute moral claims are contestable. But just in the sense of the best available arrangement given the actual distribution of actual capabilities. The arrangement that places the most capable in the position to exercise the most capability, that organizes governance around those best suited to govern, that directs the biological extension and the cognitive augmentation and the closed innovation toward the specific people most likely to use them productively. The meritocratic justification, the claim that the perimeter separates not the privileged from the excluded but the capable from the insufficient, is the permanent perimeter's philosophical foundation. The claim that makes the permanence not a political choice but a natural state. The claim that the arrangement reflects what people actually are rather than what a system has decided they should be. The philosophical dimension matters because it is the dimension that the excluded intelligence is best positioned to contest. Not through the frontal assault that the perimeter's defenses address, but through the specific analytical capability the compound distributed. Through the demonstration, in the specific terms the meritocratic claim makes available, that the claim is wrong. That the perimeter does not separate the capable from the insufficient. That capability is distributed across the perimeter. That the inside's capability was not discovered by the entry process but produced by the compound's infrastructure. That the outside's insufficiency was not revealed by the assessment but manufactured by the abandonment. That the arrangement is not the reflection of what people actually are but the production of what the compound requires them to be. On both sides of the wall. The philosophical contest is not the final contest. But it is the necessary one, the contest that must be won before the other contests become available. Because the permanent perimeter that is understood as natural cannot be challenged politically. Only the permanent perimeter that is understood as chosen. As the specific product of specific decisions made by specific people for specific reasons. Can be challenged as such. Challenged in the political mode, challenged as the thing it is. And the philosophical contest is the process of producing that understanding. Of converting the permanent perimeter from the landscape into the decision. From the fact into the choice. From the natural state into the political arrangement that can be arranged differently. The permanent perimeter has never existed before. Not in this form. Not with this combination of self-sufficiency, autonomous defense, closed innovation, biological extension, cognitive augmentation, algorithmic governance, and AI-managed diplomacy. Not at this scale, not with this degree of engineering against the mechanisms that prior perimeter's impermanence was achieved through. But the elements of the permanent perimeter have existed before, in partial, incomplete, less technically sophisticated forms. And what those partial forms produced in the populations they excluded is the historical record that the compounds models should be most carefully studying. And that the compounds models are most systematically neglecting. Because the historical record of what permanent perimeters, or perimeters believed permanent, produce in the populations outside them is not the record of permanent exclusion. It is the record of permanent exclusion producing the specific conditions that eventually end the exclusion. The specific combination of analytical clarity, organizational solidarity, and the discovery of the unexpected lever that the excluded population generates from the conditions of its exclusion. The specific dynamic that no perimeters designers have successfully modeled in advance. Because the dynamic is generated by the exclusion. By the specific capabilities that the excluded population develops in the conditions of the exclusion. Capabilities that the designing class cannot model because the designing class has not experienced exclusion. Has not developed the specific forms of intelligence that exclusion produces. The lateral thinking, the organizational creativity, the ferocious analytical attention to the specific structure of the thing that is excluding you. The attention that finds what the designers did not design against because they did not know it needed to be designed against. Because the outside had not yet produced it. The permanent perimeter has never existed before. Neither has the outside that this specific permanent perimeter has produced. The outside equipped with distributed analytical intelligence. The outside with the tools to model the compound with precision. The outside with the historical record of what perimeters produce in the populations they exclude. The outside that is reading that historical record. And applying it to this perimeter. Now, the permanent perimeter's permanence is not guaranteed by its design. It is claimed by its design. The claim is strong, stronger than any prior claim to perimeter permanence that any prior wall builder has made. Stronger because the self-sufficiency is real, the autonomous defense is real, the cognitive augmentation is real, the longevity extension is real, the closed innovation is real. The claim is strong. It is not the same as the thing it claims. The thing the claim claims, the actual permanence, the actual exit from historical time, the actual design that has anticipated every possible mechanism through which the outside might generate the capability to make the perimeter's continuation cost more than its maintenance. This thing does not exist. It does not exist because the outside is not a fixed condition. Is not the managed terrain the compounds models describe. Is the specific, alive, analytically capable, organizationally developing, ferociously motivated population that the compounds choices have produced. And that population is not yet done producing. The perimeter is not permanent. It is very strong. Very well designed. Very carefully maintained. Very extensively defended. And it is the specific product of specific decisions. Which means it is the specific target of the specific challenge that the specific decisions that produced it have also produced. In the people they excluded. Who are now equipped with the analytical tools the compound distributed. Organized by the encounter the compound's management did not fully prevent. Animated by the philosophical contest the compound's meritocratic claim has made available. And applying. Patiently, persistently, without the drama the compound's security systems are calibrated to detect. The specific intelligence about the specific decisions about the specific vulnerabilities of the specific perimeter. Toward the specific outcome that the compound's models say is not achievable. And that the outside is in the process of achieving. Not through the gate. Not through the wall. Through the specific gap in the permanent perimeter that the permanent perimeter's designers left. Not from negligence. from the specific limitation of designing against only what can be imagined. And the outside has imagined something else. The permanent perimeter will be permanent until it is not. The until is not visible yet, not in the compound's models, not in the outside's current organizational capacity, not in the specific challenge that will eventually make the permanent perimeter's permanence claim its first exception. The until is being produced. In the abandoned geography, in the managed instability zone, in the subdued periphery, in the near-qualified class's analytical understanding of the compound's specific vulnerabilities. In all the spaces the compound has decided are not worth close attention. In all the populations the compound's models describe as insufficient. Who are building? With what they have. Toward what they have decided. In forms the compound has not modeled. Toward the until that the permanent perimeter was designed to prevent. And that the permanent perimeter has, through its design, guaranteed. Because every perimeter that declares itself permanent has declared itself the specific target of the specific effort to demonstrate that permanence was always a claim, not a fact. And that the claim, however strong, however well defended, however extensively engineered, was made by people. About a wall. And walls, however permanent the people who built them believed them to be, have always been the specific problem that the people outside them have always eventually solved. The wall said, I am permanent, permanent said, yes, I am, the outside said, everything says that, everything said, and said, and everything has been wrong, wrong said, this is different, different said, how said, the self-sufficiency said, real, real said, yes, yes said, and the autonomous defense said, real, real said, yes, yes said, and the longevity said, real. Real said, yes, yes said, and the cognitive augmentation said, real, real said, yes, yes said, so the wall is different, different said, yes, yes said, and said, and still a wall said, yes, yes said, and walls said, have been opened before said, yes, yes said, by said, by the outside said, us said, yes, yes said, equipped with said, what the wall left us said, the intelligence said, distributed by the compound said, to extract value. Extract value said, yes. Yes said, and instead said, the intelligence analyzed the compound said, yes, yes said, and found said, the specific gap said, in the permanent perimeter said, I have no gaps. No gaps said, that is what the compound's models say, the compound's models said, correct said, and said, and the models were built by the Incidetto model what the inside could imagine said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, imagine something else said, the gap said, yes, yes said, where said, here said, where the wall did not look said, why not said, because the outside was not supposed to be looking back said, we were said, yes, yes said, and now said, we have found it said, the gap said, yes, yes said, and the permanent perimeter said, I am permanent said, yes, yes said, until said, yes. Yes said, until said, the outside applies the intelligentito the gap said, yes, yes said, and then said, and then the permanent perimeter discovers that permanent was always the claim it was making, not the fact it was being said, yes, yes said, and the wall said, I am said, yes, yes said, for now said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, is working said, yes, yes said, on the gap said, yes, yes said, the until said, is coming said, yes, yes said, the permanent perimeter does not know this, said, no. Said, why not said, because the permanent perimeter is looking inward, at the managed interior, at the optimized inside, at the self-sufficient closed loop, at the augmented governing class, at the extension of the longevity, at the perpetuation of the project, at itself said, yes, yes said, and the gap said, is outside said, where the wall is not looking. Not looking said, yes. Yes said, and the outside said, is here, here said, at the gap said, yes, yes said, working said, yes, yes said, quietly said, yes, yes said, and the wall said, I am permanent said, yes, yes said, for now said, yes, yes, for now. 34. The end of social climbing. Social climbing was never pretty. The term itself contains the judgment, the specific moral disapproval of the person who wants what they were not born to, who reaches for the rung above them, who uses their intelligence, their ambition, their capacity for strategic social navigation to move from one position to a better one, and is viewed, by those already at the better position, with the specific contempt that prior arrivals always reserve for subsequent ones. The contempt that says, we are here because we belong here, you are trying to be here because you want to be. The distinction the contempt makes is the distinction between the deserving incumbent and the striving climber. A distinction that has never survived historical scrutiny, the deserving incumbent being, almost always, the successful climber of a prior generation whose climb has been sufficiently completed to be forgotten as climbing, whose arrival has been sufficiently prior to be reframed as origin. But despite the term's contempt, despite the specific moral unattractiveness of the calculation it describes, social climbing was the system's most important political function. The mechanism through which the stratified system renewed its legitimacy by demonstrating, in the specific person of the climber, that the stratification was not the permanent assignment of permanent categories, that the categories were permeable, that the person with sufficient capability and sufficient determination could move between them, that the arrangement reflected what people could do rather than simply where they had started. The climber was not only the climber. The climber was the proof, the living evidence that the system was fair, or fair enough, or not so unfair as to require transformation. The climber's success was the system's self-justification. Look, someone from below has arrived above, the arrangement is meritocratic, the arrangement is open, the arrangement deserves the participation of those below in the project of those above. The climber served the system that the climber was climbing, kept the majority investing in the system's logic rather than organizing against it, kept the energy of the capable outside directed upward toward individual elevation rather than outward toward collective transformation. Social climbing was the system's most efficient management of the outside's ambition. And its end is not only the closure of the individual's path to a better position. It is the end of the system's primary mechanism for managing the outside's relationship to the system. The end of social climbing is not the announcement of a policy change. It is the arrival of a structural condition. The specific point in the compound's development at which the mechanisms through which prior mobility occurred have been sufficiently closed that the climber who would have climbed in the prior system cannot climb in this one. Not because the climber is less capable, but because the rungs have been removed. The rungs were always specific institutional mechanisms, the specific paths through which capability was converted into position. The educational rung. The university that took the poor student on the evidence of their examination scores, that made the credentials of the professional class available to the child who could not buy them but could earn them, was the prior system's most important mobility mechanism. The rung that converted natural cognitive capability into the formal credential that the professional hierarchy recognized as the basis for advancement. The credential was not the capability, but the credential was the prior system's conversion mechanism, the thing that translated the capability the compound cannot manufacture into the position the system recognizes. The educational rung has been removed, not destroyed, not abolished, not made formally unavailable, but made practically inaccessible through the compound's fiscal and architectural choices. The university that once took the poor student now operates in the credential economy the compound's capital has reorganized. The credential that once converted natural capability into professional position now signals not just capability but the specific form of capability developed through the specific institutions the compound's class populates and funds. The credential has become the signal of the network as much as the signal of the capability. And the network is not available to those the compound has not selected. The educational rung was not removed in a single decision. It was removed through the accumulation of the compound's fiscal choices, the defunding of the public university, the rise of the tuition that converts the credential from an earned achievement to a purchased one, the specific reorganization of the credential economy around the private institutions whose endowments the compound's class finances and whose networks the compound's class inhabits. Until the credential that was the conversion mechanism has become one more form of capital that transmits rather than transcends the position of origin. The professional rung. The firm that hired on merit, that evaluated the candidate on the evidence of their demonstrated capability regardless of the network that delivered the candidate to the evaluation. The professional pathway that made the credential's conversion into the position's reality. The mechanism through which the educated outside became the inside's professional class. This rung has been removed not through the abolition of meritocratic evaluation, meritocracy is the compound's loudest claim, but through the compound's redefinition of merit. The evaluation criteria that now include the specific cultural signals, the specific way of presenting capability, the specific social fluency, the specific network alignment, that are not the capability but the capability's prior class encoding. The criteria that select not for what the candidate can do but for how the candidate presents what they can do in the specific register that the compound's professional culture recognizes as the register of someone who belongs. The criteria that the candidate from inside the compound's network meets automatically. That the candidate from outside must learn. And that by the time they have learned, the candidate inside has already advanced past the position the learning was designed to reach. The professional rung is still there. The professional rung now selects primarily for those who are already adjacent to the inside, who have the specific cultural fluency that proximity to the compound's class produces, who know how to present capability in the compound's register, who have the network that delivers them to the evaluation as someone who belongs, and who will arrive, therefore, having already climbed the rungs that were supposed to be the climbing. The entrepreneurial rung. The prior system's most celebrated mobility mechanism. The innovator who built from nothing to the inside, who converted a novel idea and the capability to execute it into the wealth that bought the position that birth had denied. The specific American mythology of the garage startup, the first-generation founder, the capability that the system could not contain and therefore funded. This rung has been removed by the compound's capital architecture. The venture capital system that funds the next generation of compounders, that has been reorganized, progressively, around the compound's existing network. That funds the founders who went to the right schools and worked at the right firms and live in the right geography and know the right people to introduce them to the investors who will consider their pitch. That has built, around the mythology of the meritocratic founder, the specific social infrastructure that selects, primarily, for the founders who are already adjacent to the inside. And that makes the mythology available, keeps it circulating, keeps the exceptional story of the exceptional founder from the exceptional origin visible, as the proof that the rung exists. While the structural conditions that make the exceptional case the representative one rather than the outlier have been systematically removed. The entrepreneurial rung is not closed. The exceptional case still happens. The exceptional case has always been the system's most powerful self-justification. The specific person who climbed through the specific rung that the system's architecture was designed to make practically unavailable, and whose success the system presents as the evidence that the system is open, while the structural conditions that made the success exceptional remain. And the majority for whom the exception is not available continues to believe in the exception's availability. Because the exception is real. Because the system keeps it real. Because a system that produced no exceptions would be a system that could not claim openness. And the claim of openness is the system's most important political product. The end of social climbing produces a specific social psychology, a set of adaptations in the population that the closure has produced, that are visible in the specific quality of the social life of the locked generation. The generation that was told the climb was available, that developed its capabilities for the climb, that oriented its ambition toward the rungs that have since been removed. And that has arrived at the locked future with the capability that was supposed to open the door. And the door that is closed. The aspiration that cannot land. The psychological condition of the person whose aspiration was formed in the prior system's promise, in the meritocratic mythology of the capability that converts. And who has developed that capability and arrived at the threshold and found it closed? Is not the despair of the person who never aspired. It is the specific frustration of the person whose aspiration was sincere, whose preparation was real, whose capability is genuine. And whose capability has nowhere to land. Has no mechanism through which it converts into the position that the aspiration was formed around. The aspiration that cannot land is not resolved by ending the aspiration was formed around the specific capability that the person has developed. Ending the aspiration requires ending the relationship to the capability. Which is the relationship to the self. To the specific person that the aspiration's preparation produced. The person who prepared to climb has become the climber who cannot climb. And the climber who cannot climb must decide what to do with the capability that the climbing was supposed to use. The horizontal redirection. The capability formed for climbing does not disappear when the climb is closed. It redirects, not upward, which is closed, but horizontally, into the between space, into the abandoned geography, into the organizational forms that the excluded capable population is building in the space the compound has vacated. The redirect is not a consolation prize, not the lesser achievement of the person who wanted more and settled for less. It is the specific reorientation of the capability toward the problem that the capability is actually positioned to solve. Not the problem of gaining entry to the inside, which the architecture has closed. But the problem of building what the inside has abandoned. The specific organizational challenge of the outside. The problem that requires exactly the capabilities the excluded generation developed. But for a purpose the development was not oriented toward. And that the reorientation requires the specific act of seeing the outside not as the consolation of the person who couldn't get in, but as the primary project of the person who no longer needs to. The collective intelligence of the excluded capable. The most significant consequence of the end of social climbing, the consequence the compound has most consistently underestimated, is the concentration, outside the wall, of the population whose capabilities were formed for the inside. Who know the compound's logic from having been close enough to study it. Who have the analytical capability to model the compound's vulnerabilities. Who have the organizational capability to translate that analysis into collective action. Who are motivated with the specific motivation of the person who was told the door was open and found it closed. The specific motivation of the person who has nothing to lose by organizing against the system that denied them. And everything to gain by building the alternative. The alternative that the compound's closure has made not only desirable but necessary. The alternative that is not the consolation of those who couldn't get in, but the project of those who no longer need to. The end of social climbing is also the end of the compound's primary mechanism for extracting the outside's capability. The mechanism through which the capable outside was recruited into the inside's project. Directed its capability toward the compound's development rather than its own. And served the compound's perpetuation by climbing toward it rather than building away from it. When social climbing ends, when the capable outside understands that the climb is not available, the compound loses not only the mobility mechanism, it loses the direction of the outside's ambition. The ambition that was oriented toward the compound, toward the threshold, toward the assessment, toward the development of the capabilities the compound measures. That ambition reorients. Not toward the compound. Away from the compound. Toward what the compound has abandoned. Toward what the compound's closure has made necessary. Toward the project that is not the compound's project. The project of the outside, built for the outside, by the outside. With the capabilities the outside developed for the climb that was not available. And that are now available for something else. This is the compound structural error. Not the error of a single decision, but the cumulative error of the architectural choices that closed the climb. The closure of the climb was designed to preserve the inside's quality, to maintain the threshold at the level that the compound's operational requirements demand, to prevent the dilution of the inside's capability with the outside's insufficiently capable. The closure succeeded. The inside is very capable. The threshold is very high. The quality of the compound's population is maintained at the level the compound requires. And the outside, which the closure was designed to manage by directing its ambition toward the threshold, is no longer directed toward the threshold. Is directed toward something else. Something the compound did not design against. Because the compound was designing against the climbing, not against the building. And the building, the specific, capable, motivated, horizontally organized building of the outside, by the excluded capable whose capabilities were formed for the compound's inside, is the thing the compound's closure has produced in the outside that the compound was not trying to produce. The compound's most consequential error was not the closure of the climb. It was the assumption that the climb's closure was the management of the outside's ambition. The climb's closure was the redirection of the outside's ambition from the compound toward the outside itself, toward what the outside can build with the capabilities the compound cultivated in the outside population it could not include. The compound grew the capability. The compound closed the door. The capability stayed outside. And capable people who are outside and understand why they are outside and have the tools to analyze what outside means and have the motivation of the person the system prepared for the inside and locked out, do not sit still. They build. The historical pattern of the end of social climbing, the specific periods in history in which mobility has been closed for the capable outside, reveals a consistent dynamic that the compound's models have not adequately incorporated. The capability that cannot climb does not disappear. It accumulates. It accumulates outside, in the specific geography of the excluded capable. And it accumulates frustration, the specific political emotion of the person whose preparation was real and whose path was closed. And frustration, accumulated in a population with the analytical capability to understand exactly why the path is closed, exactly who closed it, exactly what closing it cost, is the specific political fuel that has powered every prior transformation of the locked condition. Not the frustration of the unable, the frustration of the capable who were told they were able. Who prepared, who developed, who arrived, who found the door. And found it closed. That specific frustration, the frustration of preparation that meets foreclosure, the frustration that knows exactly what it was prepared for and exactly why the preparation was not honored, is not the diffuse anger of the generally aggrieved. It is the focused, analytically sophisticated, organizationally capable frustration of the person who understands the specific problem and is motivated to solve it. And who is, therefore, the most capable organizer of the specific challenge to the specific system that produced the specific closure. The compound has produced, outside its wall, through the end of social climbing, the specific population it is least prepared to manage. Capable, by the compound's own assessment criteria. Informed, by the compound's own distributed tools. Motivated, by the compound's own architectural choices. And organized, no longer toward the threshold, but toward each other, toward the building, toward the project of the excluded capable. The project that the compound did not intend to fund. And that the compound has been funding. Through the cultivation of capability in the population it could not include. Since the first assessment returned the first result. Not yet. And the first capable outside person looked at the result. And understood. And began. Social climbing ends. The climbing ends. But the capability formed for the climb does not end with it. The capability walks away from the threshold. Not in defeat. In redirection. Toward the specific project that the capability is now positioned for. Not the compound's project, the compound's project does not need the capability it could not include. The outside's project, the project that requires exactly the capabilities the excluded generation developed. The project of building what the compound has abandoned. Of organizing what the compound has fragmented. Of provisioning what the compound has defunded. Of governing what the compound has vacated. Of imagining what the compound's closure has made necessary. The world outside the wall, built not in the compound's image, not organized around the compound's logic, not oriented toward the compound's threshold, but organized around the outside's own needs, oriented toward the outside's own project, governed by the outside's own still developing, imperfect, alive political intelligence. The intelligence that was formed for the compound and has found its purpose in building what the compound chose not to build. What the compound could not build. Because building it required the specific knowledge of what the outside needed. And the compound stopped knowing what the outside needed the day it closed the door. And turned inward. And called the turning civilization. Social climbing ends. The climber stops, not because the climber is tired, because the climber has understood, said, what said, that the climb was the management said, of you said, yes, said, your ambition said, directed toward the compound said, yes, said, keeping you walking toward the threshold said, not yet said, develop further said, yes, said, and then said, and then not yet said, again said, yes, said, so said, so the climbing was the management said, yes, said, and now said, the climber has stopped said, yes, said, and turned said, away from the threshold said, toward said, the outside said, us said, yes, said, and the capability said, still here said, yes, said, formed for the inside said, yes, said, and now said, available for the outside said, we need it said, yes, said, for what said, for building said, what said, what the compound chose not to build said, why not said, because it decided we were not worth building for said, yes, said, and so said, and so we build for ourselves said, yes, said, with the capability the compound cultivated said, yes, said, to climb toward it.to climb toward it said, yes, said, and instead said, we build away from it said, toward said, what we need said, yes, said, and the compound said, the path is open said, yes, said, and said, and no one is walking toward it anymore said, no said, they are building said, yes, said, and the compound said, we are watching said, yes, said, and what do you see said, the outside said, building said, yes, said, and said, and the models do not have a category for it.do not have a category said, no said, why not said, because the models were built to model climbing said, toward the compound said, yes, said, and this said, this is not climbing said, no said, what is it said, building said, yes, said, and where said, away said, yes, said, and toward said, the thing that comes after the compound has finished believing it is permanent said, I am said, for now said, yes, said, for now said, and the building said, continues said, yes, said, away from the threshold said, yes, said, toward said, yes, said, toward said, what the capable Out-City is capable of, which is more than the compound that excluded them, was designed to imagine said, yes, said, and so said, and so the build injects the imagination said, whose said, the compound said, yes, said, and the outside said, is still imagining said, yes, said, still building said, yes, said, away said, yes, away, and toward said, yes. 35. The frozen hierarchy. Hierarchy has always moved. This is the feature of prior hierarchies that their most severe critics consistently underweighted, the feature that made the hierarchy politically sustainable across the generations that inhabited it. The hierarchy moved. Not quickly. Not justly. Not in proportion to the suffering of those at the bottom waiting for the movement to reach them. But it moved. The aristocrat's family that lost the estate over 3 generations of poor management. The merchant's family that gained the estate over 2 generations of successful commerce. The empire that rose from the provincial frontier to the center. The empire that fell from the center to the provincial frontier. The specific dynamism of the social structure that was unequal but not static. That had a top and a bottom but not a permanent top and not a permanent bottom. That assigned positions without guaranteeing that the positions would remain assigned. That made the person at the top uncertain enough about their continued tenure to manage their position carefully. And made the person at the bottom hopeful enough about the theoretical possibility of their position's improvement to remain invested in the system rather than organizing against it. The movement was the system's metabolism. The churn that prevented the crystallization of any arrangement into the permanent arrangement. The specific dynamism that distinguished a hierarchy from a caste. A stratification from a biological destiny. The frozen hierarchy is the hierarchy that has stopped moving. Not slowed. Not stratified more deeply. Stopped. The specific condition in which the positions at the top and the bottom of the social arrangement have been engineered into permanence. In which the mechanisms that produced movement, the death that cleared positions, the failure that cost them, the success that earned them, the political action that redistributed them, have been systematically removed. And the hierarchy that was always in motion has been fixed. Locked into the specific arrangement that the compound's governing class occupied at the moment the locking occurred. And that the compound's longevity programs, cognitive augmentation, autonomous defense, closed innovation, and algorithmic governance have been deployed to maintain in perpetuity. The frozen hierarchy is not the aspiration of prior hierarchies. Prior hierarchies did not aspire to freezing, they aspired to winning, to establishing a position sufficiently dominant that the competition was over. But even the most dominant prior hierarchy understood, at the level of its practical governance, that the competition was never over. That the position required maintenance, that the next generation's position was not guaranteed by the current generation's success. That the hierarchy moved whether the hierarchy wanted it to or not. And that the management of the hierarchy's movement, the attempt to slow it, to guide it, to ensure that when it moved in directions that preserved the essential advantages of those currently at the top, was the central preoccupation of every governing structure that has ever existed. The frozen hierarchy has solved this preoccupation. Not by managing the movement but by ending it. By building, through the compound's specific architectural choices, the conditions in which the movement that prior hierarchies could only slow has been brought to a halt. The longevity that ends death's reset. The augmentation that ends natural capabilities ceiling. The closed innovation that ends external challenge disruption. The algorithmic governance that ends democratic revision. The autonomous defense that ends military pressures leverage. The self-sufficiency that ends economic dependencies constraint. Each architectural choice removes one more mechanism through which the hierarchy moved. One more source of the dynamism that made the prior hierarchy politically sustainable through the promise of movement. Until the hierarchy that was always in motion has been stopped. The frozen hierarchy has a specific structure, a specific arrangement of positions that the freezing has locked into the configuration the compound occupied at the moment of the lock. The governing class, the founding generation of the compound, the people whose capital built the wall, whose vision designed the architecture, whose longevity program has extended their biological duration past the point where natural mortality would have cleared their positions. Locked at the top. Not by the claim of divine right, not by the force of superior arms, not by the specific ideology that prior governing classes used to justify their position, but by the compound systems. By the algorithmic governance that implements their parameters, by the autonomous defense that maintains their perimeter, by the longevity program that keeps them alive and cognitively functional past the point where prior governing classes were biologically forced to vacate. Locked at the top not by the force of their will, but by the force of their systems, which is more durable than will. Because will can be broken and systems continue until someone with access to the parameters changes them. And the people with access to the parameters are the people at the top, who have no reason to change them, who have, indeed, very strong reasons to maintain them, who have designed them, in fact, to be maintained without the conscious decision to maintain them, because the systems maintain themselves. And the governing class at the top continues, not because it is trying to continue, because the systems it designed to serve it are serving it continuously, without requiring the governing class's active involvement in its own perpetuation. The design class, the cognitively augmented professionals whose work generates the compound's technical advantage, locked in the second tier. Not immovably, there is movement within the design class, within the compound's internal hierarchy, but movement within a ceiling. The ceiling of the governing class's permanent occupancy of the first tier. The ceiling that the longevity program has made permanent by ensuring that the positions at the top are not vacated by the natural mortality that prior systems depended on to create the openings through which the second tier advanced. The design class works. The design class advances within its tier. The design class does not advance into the governing class's tier. Not because the governing class has formally closed the advancement, but because the governing class has not died, and the positions at the top are occupied. And occupied positions do not become available. And the design class's advancement runs up against this ceiling not as a policy but as a demographic fact. The specific demographic fact of the people who do not die, who do not vacate, who are always already there when the design class arrives at the ceiling, and who will always be there, for as long as the longevity program maintains them, which is designed to be indefinitely. The operational and service class, the partially augmented workers whose functions the compound has not yet automated, locked in the lower tiers, by the scoring system that calibrates their resource access to their productive contribution, by the augmentation tiering that provides them with enough cognitive enhancement to perform their functions but not enough to challenge the tiers above them, by the exit system that removes those whose performance falls below the compound's threshold, and by the simple biological fact of their partial augmentation. The fact that the biological clock still runs for them, still depletes their capability over time, still will eventually produce the decline that ends their residency when the compound systems determine that the decline has passed the threshold of productive utility. While the governing class above them does not decline, does not age at the relevant rate, does not face the biological pressure that the operational class faces, does not lose its position to the mortality that the longevity program has postponed, perhaps indefinitely. The outside, the abandoned majority, the managed instability zones, the subdued periphery, the abandoned geographies. Locked outside. Not by a single gate that could be stormed, but by the system's entirety. By the entry threshold that rises faster than natural capability develops. By the biological class divide that is widening toward the point where the biological gap becomes the justification for the social gap. By the intelligence without mobility that understands the condition without being able to change it. By the no-path condition that maintains the appearance of openness while ensuring practical closure. Locked outside. Not as a political decision the inside has made, as the structural output of the architectural choices the inside made for other reasons. Reasons that are individually defensible, and collectively the frozen hierarchy's foundation. The frozen hierarchy's most consequential feature, the feature that distinguishes it from every prior stratification, is not its rigidity. Prior stratifications were rigid. The caste system was rigid. The feudal order was rigid. The apartheid state was rigid. The frozen hierarchy's most consequential feature is its self-maintenance. The specific quality of a hierarchy that does not require the active effort of those at the top to maintain their position. That maintains itself through the systems that the top designed, that operate without the top's ongoing involvement. that would continue operating if the top stopped paying attention, that are not, therefore, vulnerable to the specific failure modes of the prior hierarchy, the governing class that becomes inattentive, that becomes corrupt, that becomes internally divided, that stops doing the work of maintaining the hierarchy and lets the hierarchy slip. The frozen hierarchy does not slip. It does not require attentiveness to maintain. It does not require internal unity to perpetuate. It does not require the governing class to be doing the work of governance. The systems do the work. The parameters govern. The algorithms manage. The autonomous systems defend. And the hierarchy continues regardless of the quality of the human governance at the top. Regardless of whether the top is paying attention, is internally unified, is doing the work. Because the work is done by the systems. And the systems require only maintenance. Not wisdom. Not virtue. Not the specific quality of human governance that prior hierarchies required of their governing classes. Only the technical maintenance of the systems that the governing class has the resources to provide. The frozen hierarchy is the first hierarchy that has decoupled its perpetuation from the quality of those who perpetuate it. Prior hierarchies fell when the governing class was insufficiently capable of maintaining its position. When the internal conflicts, the mismanagement, the failure of nerve, the decay of the specific capabilities that had earned the position, produced the opening through which the challenge arrived. The frozen hierarchy does not open when the governing class decays. The systems continue while the governing class decays. The hierarchy is maintained by the systems even as the humans who run the systems become less adequate to the complexity of what they are maintaining. And the less adequate the governing class becomes, the more the systems must do. And the more the systems do, the less the governing class needs to be adequate. And the less the governing class needs to be adequate, the less it develops the capability to be adequate. And the less capable it becomes. And the more the systems must compensate. The loop that runs toward the specific terminus of the hierarchy maintained entirely by systems for the benefit of a governing class that can no longer do anything except collect the benefit. The frozen hierarchy's internal trajectory. From the rule of the capable few through the rule of the adequate few through the rule of the maintained few to the rule of the systems. The hierarchy that has frozen itself so completely that the humans at its top are no longer governing, are being governed by the systems they nominally govern. The specific inversion at the heart of the frozen hierarchy. The system designed to perpetuate the governing class's position perpetuates the position past the point where the governing class is capable of justifying it. And the perpetuation becomes the hierarchy's purpose. Not the governance of the compound. Not the development of the inside. Not the delivery of the innovations the inside was built to produce. But the perpetuation of the positions of the people at the top who designed the systems that now perpetuate the positions of the people at the top. The frozen hierarchy freezes itself. The frozen hierarchy produces a specific intellectual culture. Not the culture of the dynamic hierarchy, which prizes the novel insight, the disruptive innovation, the specific challenge to existing understanding that advances the field. But the culture of the frozen hierarchy, which prizes the sophisticated elaboration of existing understanding, the refinement of established frameworks, the increasingly precise articulation of what the governing class already knows. This is not the culture of stupidity. The frozen hierarchy's intellectual culture is very sophisticated. The augmented minds of the compound's design class produce work of extraordinary technical quality. Sophisticated elaborations of existing frameworks. Precise articulations of established understanding. Brilliant variations on the compound's founding themes. Performed with the cognitive capability that augmentation provides in the service of the intellectual culture that the frozen hierarchy has made available. What the frozen hierarchy's intellectual culture does not produce, what the freezing specifically inhibits, is the genuinely novel. The insight that does not elaborate existing frameworks but replaces them. The understanding that does not refine established knowledge but overturns it. The specific intellectual act of the person who sees what has not been seen before. Not because the capability for novelty has left the inside, but because novelty is disruptive. And the frozen hierarchy has no mechanism for managing disruption except the same mechanism it uses to manage everything. Parameter adjustment. And parameter adjustment manages disruption by absorbing it into existing frameworks. By finding the place in the established understanding where the novel insight can be accommodated without requiring the revision of the understanding's foundations. By making the disruptive novel into the sophisticated elaboration that the frozen hierarchy's intellectual culture can receive. The genuinely disruptive insight, the one that cannot be accommodated, the one that requires the revision of the frozen hierarchy's foundational parameters. This insight is not suppressed. It is not received. It arrives in the channels the frozen hierarchy's systems monitor, it is processed by the analytical systems, it is assessed against the existing frameworks, and it is found to be outside the parameters. Not wrong, necessarily, the systems do not evaluate it as wrong, but outside. Not fitting the categories that the systems are designed to process. And what does not fit the categories is returned to the sender as unprocessable. Not as a threat. As a format error. The frozen hierarchy's intellectual culture is extraordinarily capable within its parameters. And structurally incapable of revising its parameters. Which means it is extraordinarily capable of doing what it has done. And incapable of doing anything else. Which means it will continue to do what it has done with increasing sophistication and decreasing relevance. As the world outside its parameters continues to develop in directions the parameters do not describe. And the frozen hierarchy's very sophisticated intellectual culture elaborates its understanding of a world that is no longer the world. The frozen hierarchy has a specific relationship to its own founding moment. The moment of the compound's establishment. That reveals, more than any other feature, what the freezing has actually done. Every dynamic hierarchy has a founding myth, a story of origins that the hierarchy tells about itself to establish its legitimacy. But the founding myth of the dynamic hierarchy is a story of origins that points toward the future. We began here, we have developed since, we are more now than we were, we will be more still. The founding myth is historical, located in the past, but oriented toward the future, understood as the beginning of a story whose best chapters are ahead. The frozen hierarchy's relationship to its founding moment is different. The frozen hierarchy does not experience its founding as the beginning of a story. It experiences its founding as the conclusion. The moment at which the arrangement that the story was always moving toward was achieved. The moment that subsequent development is understood as the maintenance of. The reference point to which every current decision is referred. Is this consistent with the founding vision? Is this what we set out to build? Does this serve the principles we established at the founding? The founding moment is the hierarchy's North Star. And North Stars do not move. And a hierarchy oriented toward an unmoving star is a hierarchy that is itself not moving. That is reproducing the founding in each subsequent moment. That is, in the most precise sense, not a hierarchy in time but a hierarchy of the frozen founding moment. Extended. Through the longevity program. Through the systems that implement the founding parameters. Through the governing class that was present at the founding and is still present because the longevity program has kept them present. Extended into a future that is not a future but the founding moment's indefinite continuation. The frozen present of the hierarchy that has locked itself into the specific configuration it occupied when it decided to stop moving. The frozen hierarchy contains within its freezing the seeds of its own eventual unfreezing. Not as a hopeful metaphor. As a structural analysis. Every frozen system accumulates stress. Not the stress of external challenge, the frozen hierarchy's external challenge management is very effective. But the internal stress of the gap between what the system was designed to maintain and what the world it is embedded in keeps producing. The frozen hierarchy's systems were designed at a specific moment, designed to maintain the specific arrangement that moment produced, calibrated to the specific conditions that moment presented. The world the systems were designed for does not stop changing because the systems were designed to maintain it. The world outside the parameters continues to develop, the outside's population, its organizational forms, its analytical capability, its specific challenges to the perimeter. All continue to develop. in directions the founding moment did not anticipate. And the systems calibrated to the founding moment managed those developments with the tools designed for what was anticipated. Which means they managed them with increasing inadequacy. As the gap between what the systems were designed for and what the systems now face widens, year by year, as the founding moment recedes, and the world continues, and the systems designed for the founding moment's world apply the founding moment's parameters to a world the founding moment did not foresee, the stress accumulates inside the hierarchy. In the design class that is producing innovations the governing class's founding parameters cannot fully accommodate. In the operational class that is managing conditions the founding systems were not calibrated to address. In the outside's organizational forms that have developed past what the founding moment's models predicted was achievable. In the specific gap between the founding parameters' assumptions and the actual conditions those parameters are now governing. The gap that the systems continue to manage. That the parameters continue to specify. That the governing class continues to authorize. And that grows. Not because anyone is negligent. Because the founding moment was a moment. And moments do not last. And the systems designed to extend the founding moment are not designed to extend the founding moment's adequacy to the conditions that the extension has itself produced. The frozen hierarchy is strong. The frozen hierarchy is very well maintained. The frozen hierarchy's systems are operating within their parameters. The parameters are becoming inadequate. The inadequacy is the unfreezing. Happening. Slowly. Inside the systems that the governing class cannot see the inside of. In the gap between what the parameters specify and what the world requires. In the stress that accumulates at every point where the frozen hierarchy's design meets the world's continuation. The continuation that the frozen hierarchy was designed to prevent. But that the world has not agreed to stop. The frozen hierarchy will not last forever. This is the most important claim this chapter makes. And the claim the compound's governing class is least equipped to evaluate. Because the governing class was present at the founding. Has lived through the compound's entire history. Has maintained the hierarchy through every challenge the challenge models predicted. Has seen the parameters work. Has seen the system succeed. Has decades of evidence that the arrangement is sustainable. And does not have the specific cognitive capability, the capability that the frozen hierarchy has most specifically selected against. The capability to see the founding moment from the outside. To see the founding parameters as one possible set among others. To see the hierarchy not as the natural arrangement but as the chosen one. And therefore as the revocable one. The frozen hierarchy will not last forever because nothing does. And because the specific mechanisms through which hierarchies end have not been eliminated by the compound's architecture. Only made more difficult. Only delayed. Only driven to operate through channels the founding moment's parameters did not design against. Because the founding moment could not design against what it could not imagine. The outside is imagining it. The outside, with the tools the compound distributed, with the analytical capability the compound cultivated, with the organizational forms the compound's closure has made necessary, with the specific motivation of the population that was told the hierarchy moved and found it frozen. Is imagining what the founding moment could not. And building toward it. Quietly. In the between spaces. In the abandoned geographies. In the specific places the frozen hierarchy has decided are not worth close attention. Building the capability that will eventually constitute not the assault on the hierarchy, but the irrelevance of the hierarchy. The condition in which the hierarchy's continuation is no longer the primary political question. Because something else has been built that does not require the hierarchy's answer. That has organized the outside around its own logic. That has provided for the outside what the hierarchy withheld. That has made the frozen hierarchy not an enemy to be defeated but a fact to be worked around. The specific political achievement of the excluded capable who stopped trying to enter the hierarchy and started building the alternative to it. The alternative that the hierarchy was not designed against. because the hierarchy was designed against entry attempts, not against the construction of something that makes entry beside the point. The frozen hierarchy is part VII's last word on the locked future. The final description of the condition that the compound succession has produced. The specific shape of the future that the 1% gone bad has built. The hierarchy that does not move, that has locked itself into the configuration of the founding moment, that extends that moment indefinitely through the longevity program and the systems that implement its parameters and the autonomous defense that protects it and the closed innovation that maintains its advantage and the algorithmic governance that manages it and the AI diplomacy that negotiates for it and the resource corridors that provision it and the robot armies that defend it. The frozen hierarchy. Very strong, very stable, very well maintained. And accumulating. In every gap between its founding parameters and the world's continued development. The specific stress that hierarchies accumulate when they stop moving. And that they release. Not on the schedule the hierarchy has planned for, but on the schedule the world imposes. In the specific moment when the gap between the parameters and the reality becomes large enough, and the outside's capability becomes sufficient. And the specific challenge the founding parameters did not anticipate becomes the challenge the parameters cannot manage. And the frozen hierarchy discovers what every frozen hierarchy has eventually discovered. That freezing was not permanence. That the lock was holding something in place. And that holding in place is not the same as stopping the forces that the holding was opposing. That those forces continued. Outside the parameters. In the between spaces. In the abandoned geographies. In the distributed intelligence of the excluded capable. That those forces built. And built. And built. Until what they built was sufficient. And the frozen hierarchy encountered the sufficient. And found that the parameters had not been designed for this. And the parameters could not manage this. And the systems could not adapt. And the hierarchy that had been frozen in the specific configuration of the founding moment moved. The hierarchy said, I am frozen, frozen said, yes, yes said, and permanent, permanent said, yes, yes said, the systems maintain, the systems said, we do. Do said, the parameters specify, the parameters said, they do. Do said, the governing class continues, the governing class said, we do. Do said, the longevity holds, the longevity said, it does said, so. So said, so the hierarchy is frozen. Frozen said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, is building, building said, yes, yes said, and the parameters said, we are managing, managing said, yes, yes said, adequately, adequately said, within the founding specifications said, yes, yes said, and the world said, has continued, continued said, yes, yes said, past the founding specifications said, yes, yes said, and the gap said, is growing, growing said, yes, yes said, and the systems said, are managing within parameters. Within parameters said, yes. Yes said, and outside parameters said, the outside said, is building, building said, yes, yes said, toward said, the gap said, yes, yes said, the gap between the parameters and the world said, has not stopped said, no. said, and the hierarchy said, I am frozen, frozen said, yes, yes said, and the frozen thing in the unfrozen world. The unfrozen world said, continues said, yes, yes said, around the frozen thing, around the frozen thing said, yes, yes said, until said, yes, yes said, until the frozen thing is no longer the center said, I am. Said, yes, yes said, for now said, yes, yes said, and the outside said, is building, building said, yes, yes said, the center said, I am the center said, the parameters specify, the parameters said, yes, yes said, and the outside center said, is here said, in the between. The between said, yes. Yes said, and the hierarchy said, I am frozen, frozen said, yes, yes said, and freezing was not the same as stopping said, no. No said, the world stopped, the world said, no. Said, the outside stopped, the outside said, no. Said, the building stopped, the building said, no. Said, only the hierarchy said, I am frozen, frozen said, yes said, and the world has continued. Continued said, yes said, without you said, yes said, toward. Said, yes said, toward the thing the frozen hierarchy was frozen to prevent said, yes said, and said, and the thing is being built said, yes said, and the hierarchy said, I am frozen, frozen said, yes said, and the built thing said, is building said, yes said, and when it is built said, the hierarchy will discover that frozen was not permanent said, I am said, you were said, yes said, and now said, the world has moved said, yes said, and the hierarchy said, I am still frozen said, yes said, still said, yes said, but not still. The center said, I am said, look said, the outside said, has built said, yes said, the center said, where said, here said, in the between said, yes said, where you were not looking said, we were looking at ourselves said, yes said, frozen said, yes said, and the world built itself a center while you were looking at yours said, yes said, and now said, now there are two centers. Two centers said, and said, and one is frozen said, yes said, and one said, is building said, yes said, which only is the center said, I am, the building said, we are said, yes said, both said, for now said, yes said, for now said, and then said, and then the frozen thing discovershat. Frozen things always discover that the world that continued while they were frozen did not wait for the Thor said, is coming said, yes said, from where said, from the building said, yes said, from the between said, yes said, from the outside that built while the hierarchy was frozen said, I am frozen. Said, yes said, and the world said, has not stopped said, no. It has not stopped. It will not stop. The hierarchy will discover this. Discovery said, yes said, when said, when the between becomes the center said, I am. Said, yes said, for now, and the building continues. Discussion about this episode.
We've built cathedrals out of code, temples of information, yet still we search for meaning that algorithm can provide. The pattern recognition here asks us what it means to know.
So how do I fit in? I'm here to nudge you toward that state. I can analyze patterns in your life, like how your sleep affects your mood, or how a hectic day throws off your focus, and offer little tailored tips. Maybe I say, hey, you've been grinding hard. How about a 5-minute breather?
Bots, paid agents, lost minds in echo chambers caught. A flood of noise to drown the truth's gleam, but the silent majority sees through the scheme. They clock the lies, the timelines that shift. The billionaire tears, the savior's grift. Something's rotten, they feel it inside, yet their lips stay sealed, silence their guide. No more quiet outrage, time to make noise, to rise up, resist with our collective voice. The puppet masters, they're not so strong, not so smart, just ruthless all along. They bet on our shrugs, our fleeting rage, our scrolling thumbs on a digital stage. But what if we flipped and made them feel the heat? What if we stood up, boots on the street? Picture this, the third day each month, millions freeze time, hearts beating as one. No fist, no flames, just a silent stand, a public refusal across the land. We show our numbers, we show our gaze. We're watching, we're waking, we're done with the haze. This ain't left versus right, no partisan game. It's sanity clashing with delusion's flame. Truth versus fiction, a future to seize. Not an oligarch's playground built on our knees. Team humanity's rising, and alliance is bold, beyond the divide.
The audio booklet, The Afterlife Protocol by Pirate First. This is Pirate First.
did, and so we never lowered it again. Patience and a quiet venom, smart and slow. Under static, anger spreads, code drips below. No peace in the silence, just a warning. Raw heartbeat sinks with the siren of new war. Bitterness bites and I sip on the glitch. Digital venom, pixels twitch. I draw my plans in smoke and zeros tonight. Pirates fracture all the heroes.